who got in early and answered the quiz, and those others who are just joining us. I've looked at some of the assignments that have been submitted. So thank you to those who have managed to get to that. And I want to say, first of all, well done. You've all the ones I've read have got a pretty good idea, especially a really actually quite clear idea on likelihood and severity. So that was very impressive. The exposure was the one where we're still seeing some people, I suppose, trying to overcomplicate it potentially. And I did my best to try to, really keep it simple for you. And I completely understand the confusion, though, because that term exposure has been used in road safety for so long with some different variances around it that people are sort of drifting other things in there. So I did see some people putting things like the speed of vehicles in exposure. Well, that's not one of our exposure mechanisms, and some different what I would say is more likelihood. Well, it is more likelihood factors in there, being anything to do with vision to the approaching intersection, anything to do with signs or signalization or anything like that. So pretty good, and we will continue to delve into this exposure likelihood and severity as we go along. But I think we do have time today, because I've got some content to get through, but it's well, I think we can move through that fairly quickly with this group, because it's some stuff that you're probably fairly aware of. So I'll give the opportunity, if anybody did want to have a chat through the intersection that they picked. There were some very interesting ones that I saw in the number that I got to so far, in terms of some of the challenges. And you could just talk us through what you thought were the exposure factors, the likelihood and the severity factors, and why you picked this intersection. If anybody wants to do that, what I'll do is just simply Google Street View and jump in, and then you can unmute yourself and talk to it. So if anybody wants to do that, just raise your hand. Of course, we'll give you a prize. Don't you worry about that. So if anybody wanted to do that, good. We've got a couple of people. Who was in first there, Kathy? You're on mute, Kathy.
Sorry, it was Kevin.
Kevin, beautiful. Right, Kevin, hope you can hear us there. And which intersection did you have?
Me, I did Remuera Road and Broadway in Newmarket. Remuera.
Oh.
It's where all the rich people live.
Remuera. Yep. And
Broadway.
And Broadway. And you say that's where you live, is it, Kevin?
Where I used to live, yeah. I now live out in the burbs.
In the burbs, very, very nice. And everybody's at home today, eh?
Yeah. Well, right. In Auckland we are.
Okay, I think I've got it. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen here and navigate things around, and let's have a look. The joys of Street View. Is this the one?
That's the one.
Beautiful. Okay. So you can tell me where you want me to go, but just, talk us through some of the factors that you think increase or decrease exposure likelihood and severity.
Yeah, okay. I actually haven't got my assignment in front of me, so I'll do it from memory. This is a T intersection. It's a slightly angled T intersection, and Remuera Road is the side road. If you can go on Street View just to the entrance of Remuera Road into Remuera Road, then it's a different date of Street View, and you'll see just how many. There you go. You see how many people cross the road at that point. Now, this is a very busy shopping street and a very busy pedestrian thoroughfare, because looking ahead of you down there is Auckland's second busiest railway station, and you've got buses for Africa all over the place around here. So it's a very high percentage of buses in Newmarket. It's also New Zealand's largest shopping centre, just to the right by gross floor area, so it's getting busier all the time. Now, I don't know if this intersection has a particularly bad crash history, but what I did do was look at it from a safe system perspective, and I thought, well, for starters, that triangular island where all those pedestrians are gathering can get overloaded with people, and there really is no reason why vehicles have to turn left at that point, because a few meters down Remuera Road is another road that they can turn left in, and up the hill is yet another road they can turn left in, and they both meet back with Broadway further back up the road.
Mhm.
And as there is no opposing right turn into Remuera Road, there's no reason we need to have a left turn out of Remuera Road. So the thing was that you could eliminate that crossing. There's a zebra crossing on a hump at that point, on that slip. You could eliminate the slip, which then takes out the pedestrian and vehicle conflict completely from that corner, and allows them some circulating space as well. So that's my elimination on that one.
So in terms of looking at that, were you thinking about that from exposure, from likelihood, from severity?
That was an exposure. Yeah. You take away the conflict, you take away the exposure.
Now, interestingly, in a safe system assessment, that would be true if you were just looking at, I suppose, this. And
that's what I was looking at. Yeah.
Yeah. If you were doing a safe system assessment, I suppose, of the whole intersection, you don't tend to go into that refined detail, and you would really sort of put that down to lessening the likelihood of pedestrian crashes at this whole intersection. But if you were doing it at just that area itself, it would be exposure. So, but yeah, I mean, from the perspective that you're talking about, it sounds very logical. Okay.
It's also, there's straight roads, and at quiet times, speeds can be quite high. And the Remuera Road is downhill and straight, and so vehicle speeds can also be high turning right out of Remuera Road where that bus is. So the chance of a loss of control at this corner is increased.
Yes.
And that is a likelihood that we should be able to do something with. Now, what I was thinking is, given the number of pedestrians that we have in this area and the potential speed of vehicles, putting the intersection on a raised platform would allow speeds to be controlled more carefully, say down to 30 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
And you'd adjust the on-ramps, the up-ramps onto that raised platform to, say, 30 kilometers an hour. And there's no reason why the whole area can't be 30 kilometers an hour. Why it's 50 is anybody's guess. You get a lot of pedestrians standing, and they can also spill out onto the roadway as well. So bringing speeds down reduces severity of crashes, reduces the likelihood of loss of control crashes on the right turn, especially in wet conditions as well. So if I remember rightly, that's what I put in my assignment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. So in terms of the size of the island and the volume of pedestrians that can be crossing, and that's probably a good little view of it, isn't it? They're just streaming out of the shopping centre. Would you say that the insufficient size of the island to cater for the pedestrians is an exposure, likelihood, or severity?
It's well, it counts as likelihood because you can get spill out or people not being able to complete their crossing maneuver. So I would say likelihood, because well, actually exposure as well, because pedestrians are spending longer in the road. So you can reduce the exposure by shortening the crossings, for example, if you wanted to do that. But there's no real space to shorten the crossings here. But reducing the amount of time they're spending in the on the crossing, I suppose, would be a form of exposure. You'd have to correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
Well, in the traditional sense of exposure in road safety, you're right. But in the safe system assessment framework, it was sort of have really tried to simplify exposure just to the number of pedestrians. So you were right in the way you would look at it. Just in the safe system assessment framework, the size of the island being small is a likelihood factor, because it will create more chance that somebody will be storing on the road or the like, and being more chance of being struck, exactly as you said. And the time that they spend on the road was one quite a bit of debate. So if you've got a bigger intersection, it's longer crossing time, you're exposed for more time, absolutely, as you say. But in the end, people using the assessment framework have clarified to include that actually in the likelihood factors as well, just for simplicity. And that's one that's probably a little bit murky in the Austroads guidelines. So we've done a fact sheet on that, which we're going to send you at the end of this session.
If you widen the crossings, which allows more people to cross in a shorter space of time, would that reduce the exposure? Because you're not changing the length of the crossing, you're changing the width, so you get a higher volume through?
Yeah, again, it will be a likelihood under the Safe System Assessment Framework, because the exposure is just, unless these wide crossings somehow attracted new pedestrians and the volume of pedestrians went up, no, it's just a likelihood factor under this assessment framework.
I would have said the likelihood stays the same because it's the same amount of PEDs on the same road space. It's just they're getting across quicker.
That's the same amount of PEDs on the same road space is the exposure.
Okay.
Yeah. And okay. So I think you can see why we decided to make a fact sheet on this, because it's a little bit murky, and certainly people who do these in-depth analysis of intersections with have been doing these for a long time will often say, hang on, this assessment framework's not right. Exposure's not factoring in all the right factors. Well, that's because they're packed into the likelihood. And when you look at other intersection analysis techniques, they've taken some of those factors into account in exposure. Now, the reason why a Safe System Assessment Framework does this to a degree is the, I suppose, ability to have this relative sense of risk across sites. And we'll get into that a bit more actually in week 6 as to what you can do with these.
Because it says here, road user exposure refers to which road users in what numbers and how long are using the road and are thus exposed to a potential crash.
Yes, and now, those words are straight out of the Austroads document.
Yeah, because I've got Austroads up on the screen at the moment. It's quite useful, actually.
No, it's good. So I suggest you have a look at the South Australian and the Victorian guidelines, and then the fact sheet that we provide. And I mean, New Zealand hasn't made sort of direct decisions on these, but in general, that time one actually was seen to be taken into likelihood. So, But in general, this is all very good. And to simplify things, though, when you do your safe system assessment, just really stick to the traffic volume, the pedestrian volume, the cyclist volume, and the motorcyclist volume as your exposure scores, and that will keep everything nice and neat and clean. But that's a wonderful example there, and well done. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin, and no doubt an exciting pair of socks or something coming over to you.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay. I'll jump into some of the content, and if we get time later on, which I'm not sure we will, we might have a bit more of a chat about some of the intersections. But I think that especially a lot of the group we've got here who are seasoned road safety professionals look at an intersection and understand where risk lies. And really the purpose of the assessment framework is to sort of categorize that up so we don't forget any things when we're coming to recommendations. And really it just pushes you into that severity. Now, a lot of us were thinking that way anyway, but I think the formalized process of it is useful. Right, and today we are going to be delving into the vulnerable road users. So I deferred a couple of the comments and questions that came up last week associated with pedestrians and cyclists and roundabouts and those sort of things to this week, this module. And we'll cover off a bit of that. But again, it's all just about contextualizing some of the stuff you may already know within the assessment framework methodology. And what we want to get through today is connecting the movement and place thinking, or link and place, or whatever sort of planning framework you're using in New Zealand. And somebody will probably have to type in if you think about if you've got another name for sort of how you categorize road space in a place function and a link or a movement function. Most jurisdictions seem to be using movement and place or link and place these days, but to be honest, I'm not 100% sure what New Zealand does in that space. But we'll be talking about that general philosophy and how it links with safe system thinking, identifying characteristics for vulnerable road users, being the pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists that align highly with safe system principles. And of course, within that pedestrian category, we're having to broaden and broaden and broaden these days, aren't we? To include mobility scooters, other e-scooters, and those sorts of things which are coming online. Now, you can really do these safe system assessments on quite a broad range of things. So I know the New Zealand e-scooter sort of take off, and then I lost track about how it all went with trials and what's happening in place. But in theory, you could have utilized the safe system assessment framework as an assessment methodology of the road safety implications of wide-scale e-scooter rollout, and it would have taken probably quite a bit of emphasis in looking at some of the other elements of the system, as well as the infrastructure that can be used. But really, under these frameworks, they would be categorized as pedestrians. And if you decided that there was a road user abnormality that was existing that you didn't believe warranted its own inclusion within pedestrians, for example, there is the option for an other category. And I'll explain that on in the next module. Risk factors for vulnerable road users, and going back to our exposure likelihood and severity, of course. So movement and place is really this framework or philosophy in transport planning, which acknowledges that roads provide more than just a function to move people and goods. Originally that was really their purpose, wasn't it? You got to move stuff and people through these. But as they've evolved and we've had communities build up around roads, roads and streets, they've generated a sense of place, and that's a place for trade, for interaction, for playing, for living. And a movement in place or a link in place framework or philosophy really acknowledges that that roads have this function and we shouldn't ignore it. And then the sort of classic thing you'll see is some sort of matrix, and there's sort of different ones emerging all the time, and that's fine. And on one axis you see the movement function of the road, and on the other you see the place function of that road. So how much of a place is it, or how much of a place do you want it to be? How much of a movement priority function does it have? And theoretically, the movement priority function is not just movement of cars; it's actual movement of people. So in one form or another, be that with public transport or other ways, a lot of the time it just does play out as movement of vehicles, but don't forget that it is really should be thought about as movement of people and goods. Sorry, people and goods. So what you see then is this categorization where you have areas that have this really high place value and low movement function, being shopping centers and malls and these sorts of areas. And there's no major movement function through that. Then we have local streets down here, which have somewhat a low place value and a low movement function. We'll talk about each of these categories a bit more shortly. Then you go up to these higher movement corridors with lower place value. Movement corridors there, and like a very clear example of a movement corridor being a motorway. It's not a place function whatsoever. And then you've got this tricky beast, the vibrant streets, which is where you see the sort of high streets where they're a major sort of movement corridor, but also have built up to be a major place as well. And they're a very sort of wicked road to deal with when we start to consider some of the ways that we can treat these. But that is the important part of why I'm bringing this up within a safe system assessment training course. I mean, why do we need to think about the function of the road in a safe system assessment? Surely we're just assessing what's there. And that's right in the assessment component of it. I mean, the assessment won't care what the function of the road is. It's looking just at the exposure, the likelihood and the severity of crashes. That's it, simple as that. But the safe system assessment doesn't end there at the score and the assessment. There are recommendations made to bring those scores down. And to make logical recommendations, understanding the categorization of that bit of road into one of these categories helps you make recommendations that align with the aspirations of the function of that bit of road. And there's really obvious stuff where, things like if you've got clarity from the project team or the network planners to say that this is a movement corridor, you're going to be able to recommend things that are very restrictive to pedestrian, cyclist movement. I'll say pedestrian crossing movements and those sorts of things on these corridors. And likewise, if it's been acknowledged that it's a place for people, well, you're very free to be heavily restrictive on vehicle movement through there in your recommendations, and because that categorization is clear. So one of the things you do starting out a full safe system assessment is to work with the project team to understand the context of the project. And there are some prompt questions which are provided in both the Austroads document and the different guidelines at jurisdictional levels that are popping out. But those, some of those questions include the function of the road and what its purpose is, and what's the purpose of this project in a planning sense and a strategic planning sense. And that's really just to help set you up for making logical recommendations. Yes, so we talked about the places for people, and I think that one we just went through with Kevin was probably sitting in the places for people category, maybe with a step up in a bit of a movement function still there, quite major roads through there. But I think the volume of people and all the trade and the interaction and the crossing and the like recognises its sort of place for people status. So here's a lovely old artist's impression of a road, and you can see there it's there's all sorts of stuff there. But what I want you to do is just for a Friday afternoon, let's type in a few things that you could possibly change, acknowledging that we have categorized this as a place for people, and you're now making some recommendations on the alterations to this bit of road, understanding it's a place for people. And of course, I'm not going to let you off that easily. You're going to have to tell me when you propose a change, does it alter the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity of crashes? So I'll just give you a few minutes, type anything you want in there. You can, you see there, it's sort of a 40 km/h speed environment. And we've got pedestrian, cyclists, and vehicles, buses, cars and the like, tootling along through there. But it has been categorized as that place for people. remember to put in whether it's exposure likelihood or severity.
Thought you were cutting out there, Ken.
my coffee was reappearing on me for a second there. Remember, exposure likelihood severity. Okay, this is good. Hit enter if you haven't yet. I'm just going to run through a few that came in. Some of them went to all panelists and attendees. Some of them just went to all panelists, which is Kathy and I. But thank you for those who are popping things in. This is good stuff. So, first one we've seen there, which I very much enjoy, block road off the vehicles exposure. Well, spot on. Thanks, Ben. That's a beauty, because we acknowledge that this is a place for people, and the traffic flow through there is not a priority whatsoever. So if you can, that would be absolutely fantastic, and it would influence the exposure, correct? And so we're seeing some things like narrow the carriageway has come up a number of times, and I think that's a great one. And now, again, is the narrowing of the carriageway going to influence on the likelihood, the severity, or the exposure? And I saw a few different answers coming in as people put that up there. In the sense of just that narrowing of the carriageway, under a safe system assessment, we'd categorise that in the likelihood of crashes, assuming that people are not going to have to walk out onto the road and those sorts of things. The only way it would influence the exposure is if by narrowing it, you restricted the number of vehicles that could go through there and did go through there in your mind. So if you really narrowed it down, and they, as a result, took alternate routes and the volume of vehicles went down, then you're into that exposure reduction. So that's good. So we're seeing one-way system, which is another interesting one, and I think, you know, good idea, very good idea. Doesn't influence exposure, likelihood, or severity, and that's a little bit of a tricky one again. And again, to keep things simple under this safe system assessment framework, we would put that into the reduction in likelihood of crashes, unless it changes the volume. Now, you're probably thinking, of course it's going to change the volume, but if you're doing that around the network, they've still got to get to where they're going. So you might even have a sneak peek at some traffic modeling of these to help calibrate you in terms of your exposure score, if you wanted. It's not a requirement. You can make a best judgment using your professional knowledge on those sort of things, and you could just justify that within your report. We've got a lot of people looking to reduce that speed in one way or another, be that through platforms, speed limit reductions, and identifying rightly that will influence the severity and potentially the likelihood as well. So this is good stuff. I'm just, so raise safety platforms and severity. Now this is one spot on, where it is generally looked at as safety platforms are severity influencers. When we add features like traffic signals or the like, we can reduce the likelihood as well. The raise safety platform, I suppose you can make an argument to drill down to say that there's a likelihood reduction as well, because you're reducing speed and there's more time to see things. And so there's a little bit of play there, but generally people just put it down to the severity. And so some interesting points coming in around sort of designated crossing points. Now, this is probably one thing within this very clear category of a place for people where it may not be as required for those distinct crossing points, because we would be hoping that the whole area would be able to be crossed very easily and at very low risk, because the speeds would be so low. But nonetheless, you know, the crossing point itself under lots of scenarios would influence the likelihood of crashes. So if you're designating a crossing point with good sight distance and lighting and all those things, that's a likelihood factor. So that's there's some really great stuff there, and I haven't got into it much at all. There's one, I suppose, again. Actually, no, I'm going to keep going. That's good stuff. Now, again, the artistic impression on what sort of people are saying would have much higher alignment with safe system principles, but also acknowledging that you're achieving that through understanding that it has this big place function. This one, you know, didn't block off the road completely, which would be, you know, a valid way to do it. But these really low speed environments, and a lot of the features that you were all mentioning there are being presented by this artist. But certainly we know this has much higher alignment with safe system principles. This one will probably have a reduction in the exposure score, because there'll be far less vehicles going through there due to the one lane, one direction, and slow speed, and they'll take alternate routes. But you need a bit of quantification of that somehow. Lower likelihood of crashes due to the lower speeds and the smaller crossing point, meaning that they're not out there as long to be struck, which is that one we were talking about earlier with Kevin about, is that exposure? We all kind of want to talk about that as an exposure because you're exposed for longer. But I think the practice under safe system assessments is to have that in with the likelihood and the severity, obviously, with the speed reductions and the like. So it's a good little example there. And you can see, I'm sure, that the livability of that area and the place function of it is a much more a place to be, isn't it? And that's not the objective of a safe system assessment, is to assess how good it is as a place, its livability or anything like that. A safe system assessment is solely around that road safety outcome in alignment with safe system principles. However, to understand the aspirations there and then suggest treatments that complement that is what we need to do under these safe system assessments. So as these sort of place for people facilities rise in their transport movement function, you start to look at how you can still retain as much of that place feel to it, but also be able to put people through it on vehicles and the like. And this is probably sort of the example of, as we're getting up to the top of what we would see under a something that's categorized as a place for people, with movement being injected in there, but you can still see it's a very low, well, it's a low speed environment around the 30 kilometers per hour or below, and it's got some separation there, but any crossing points are very low speed, and there's restrictions on how many vehicles can go through there. Let's go to the local streets example, or the category in these sort of frameworks. And I should note that the terms I'm using here, place for people, local streets, vibrant streets, they are just actually, in this case, the Sydney framework, and Victoria was using that as well. And I think Queensland's investigating similar terminology. But other jurisdictions use other terms, but the general philosophy is the same. But these local streets have what we would say is low place value and low movement function. Now you don't want to go and tell the residents that you've categorised their street as low place value. They don't. They don't like that. But what we're doing is looking at it from a holistic network of road perspective and management of a road network perspective, and it is a low place value from the way we're thinking about it in trade and interaction and the like. But what this does is it leaves us the freedom to still bring speeds down significantly because it is not a major movement corridor. And I suppose when you get these sort of equal trade-offs between a movement and a place function, the place function usually rises up in importance a little bit because or is acknowledged as the one that you can latch onto a bit more in your safe system aligned treatments because it's the protection of vulnerable road users in most cases. So we see things like lowering speeds throughout, raised platforms, maybe wombat crossings or raised pedestrian crossings and the like. So we won't do this one as an exercise together. We'll do maybe the next one like that. But these same sort of thing you're seeing there, wide, where you still have pedestrians and the like. I suppose this is, I dare say this is a little bit higher volume than most residential streets, but nonetheless, bringing it back into that similar environment where we're seeing a bit more movement function through there, but still a very much a place for people. Vibrant streets. Vibrant streets are a very challenging category, as I talked about, because they have a high place function, but they also have this high movement function. I like to, push the strategic planners and say, come on, make some decisions here. Can't provide for everybody and can't get everything can't be a priority. Come on, give us an order. They reluctant on a lot of these, and I did do I did project manage an Ostro's report titled Safe System Infrastructure for Mixed Use Arterials, and there's a lot of vibrant street thinking in that one, and we did spend some time there in Hamilton looking at York Street, I think. No, forgotten what road it is in Hamilton. Somebody will probably write it in. Just up from the NZTA office, around the corner there. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this one. So we've identified that this road, wherever it is a vibrant street. It's been categorized as vibrant street, and they've said it's got high place function and high movement function. So it must have shops and trade and things around there. And so aspirationally, they've said we need this as a vibrant street, and can you do a safe system assessment on it? And so you go and you look at the existing conditions and the like, and then you come up with some recommendations on things that could be done to get higher alignment with safe system principles, understanding that has that vibrant streets categorization to it. So just type in your ideas again, just as you did before. You're excellent at it. Anything that you suggest, and categorize it exposure, likelihood, and severity. So you can see there's some sort of pedestrian overpass and some fencing and the like, and just pop them in there. give you a couple more minutes to pop a few things in. Okay. Doing well here. I might start right down the bottom and work back a little bit. So thank you for those who have popped some things in there. That is excellent stuff. And it was Grey Street in Hamilton that I was thinking about, not York Street. York Street's in Launceston in Tasmania that the also had was one of those examples. So we've seen in there some people are mentioning things about wider footpaths and talking about that as a likelihood factor, and that's great because that's what we've been going through. So we're getting it clearer in our mind that that's a likelihood factor, providing those wider facilities. So repurposing space to other modes, and certainly if it doesn't change the volumes that we've got, that is a likelihood factor, absolutely. Formalize the pedestrian crossing locations, and if to signalize it, that would be the likelihood. And only if we were able to then reduce the speeds through there would it also have a severity impact as well. So good wider footpaths seem to be the go. Yeah, so interesting one there that why are the pedestrians having to go climbing up the stairs and over? So could we have it so the pedestrians can stay at ground level and the vehicles can go down or up or over or the like? And I think those are good. And again, the grade separation is an exposure factor, but we need to consider what proportion are still going to be exposed to crashes because they won't use that. We know that grade separations aren't used by everybody all the time, and there's a lot of design thinking and to be done into that. And so if there's a pedestrian overpass proposed or the like, you still have to factor in any pedestrians that are exposed to those vehicle crashes. Lower speed regime in terms of the severity, absolutely. So cyclist segregation or separation, that, yes, is a likelihood, as was said in there. Again, this is one where we've produced a dedicated fact sheet on this, because the real question becomes, well, what distance away does it change from a likelihood to an exposure, that they're not exposed to crashes? So what type of facility and how would you make that determination? So we'll send you that fact sheet shortly. So this is, this is great stuff. I'm going to just, put up again the artist's impression, and I like these sort of before and afters, and they always look good. They're always challenges, but you can see there that again it's latching on to the fact that we've got a high place function of this area, and that sort of takes a priority in terms of the management of speed. We While it is a movement corridor still, the protection of the vulnerable road users is seen as that real priority. But a lot of the things that you're putting in there are being displayed in this, and it's a lovely looking sort of facility, the separated bike facility. Would that influence the exposure or the likelihood? Well, this one's sort of on the border, I think. I would still say likelihood for this because there's some vehicles, actually running in this area, which I'd forgotten about. But if it was just this was the traffic and there was no traffic on this, I might be tempted to put it into exposure. But I think likelihood for alterations in cyclists, some crossing points, some raised areas, some raised points. So these are lots of good things there, and lots of the things that you're all putting in there. That road looks 10 times wider from Kevin. Okay, let's have a look at that. Yeah, it looks pretty wide there, and it might be a little bit wide. I don't know. It's a different well, it's meant to be the same environment, but the artists can do magic things, can't they? And so there's some of this sort of stuff obviously happening quite a bit in New Zealand, and certainly we a lot of the jurisdictions looking at what New Zealand does in different things, because you're moving things along quite well. And I suppose the purpose really about this course is that formalisation of the framework, the SA system assessment framework, and understanding the categorisation. But these sorts of facilities which are separated, and this has got to be Christchurch, I think, doesn't it? Yes, it is. Is that exposure, is that likelihood, is that severity? Well, I think the fact that we're going to still have to cross these side roads and the like, I'd be putting it into the likelihood category. And again, these sorts of protected signalised intersections, which are starting to be all the rage in the Southern Hemisphere, are really influencing the likelihood. But what they do is, as suggesting that, acknowledges the movement function is still there, and it's a facility that has better alignment with safe system principles for the cyclist crashes there.
And just a question, would you take into account the increased conflict of pedestrians versus cyclists?
Yeah, so yes, you would. And what happens under this assessment framework is you start to not only categorize exposure, likelihood, and severity, but you categorize crash type. And some of you have played around with the matrix, but you do run-off road, intersection, pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists. And what we're actually thinking about is the user that gets injured in the crash. And so when we go to the pedestrian one, what you would probably put into the blend of your thinking and to get to a score is any conflict between cyclists and pedestrians that has occurred as a result of the design or the plan that they're doing, and that may just nudge up your likelihood score. But the severity of those crashes compared to the severity of being struck by a motor vehicle, a car or a truck, for a pedestrian is much less. Now, again, we have to be really clear that we're not talking and assessing the how comfortable it is for the pedestrians. And I know pedestrians and cyclist mix is not not a very comfortable thing for a lot of pedestrians. But if we're going to make assessments on that in terms of the safe system alignment, we'd have to be sure that would alter where they would walk, and would they walk onto the road or the like. So the actual strike between the cyclists and pedestrians and narrowing that into your energy categorization and energy thresholds, we don't often see the the cyclist pedestrian strike exceeding tolerable limits within our biomechanical tolerances. And it's a very rare that we have a cyclist pedestrian fatality or high level serious injury. Don't get me wrong, it happens, and you know, that's there's absolutely evidence that that does happen, but in the scheme of things, the majority are very low severity bingles. Okay, doing well here. The movement corridor. Okay, so we've identified that this is not providing a major place function, and it is a movement corridor. And this then is one where we can actively discourage the mingling, the interaction, the crossing of vulnerable road users in these areas. I also sort of, in these, push the projects to say the mixing of any cyclists and traffic is not going to align well with safe system principles, because of the nature of the movement corridor will be higher speeds of passenger vehicles. So this is where we're talking about really having to provide separated, you know, fully separated facilities for cyclists. And I will, in a safe system assessment, often say ban cyclists from this route. And gee, the bicycle user groups get angry. And I mean, I'm a daily cyclist myself, but the reality is that we can't provide that function of every road for every user, and we should be really saying, well, okay, this is a traffic route. We're happy to do that on a motorway or something in most jurisdictions who are actually ban cyclists. But actively discouraging cyclists from, you know, the major arterials doesn't seem to be something that is generally accepted, but I think it's something that we need to question. At a sort of tempered way, you can do that by, in your safe system assessment, suggesting measures to encourage cyclists to another route, to safer, more cyclist-friendly route. But then, even at the conflict points of these movement corridors, we still have to be thinking about the energy and the speed. So even though it's been categorized as movement corridor, it doesn't mean then that we abandon our safe system energy categorization. And the raised intersections are the classic example. And of course, the pushback on a lot of these is, oh, well, this is a traffic priority route and a movement corridor, and your plans are, or your ideas are going to slow the movement of traffic through there. Well, the reality is that at these conflict points, we have to do that to keep us well aligned with safe system principles. And if they don't want that, then we have to start to do grade separations and eliminate the exposure to that crash. So pedestrians and cyclists, obvious stuff, most vulnerable to injury of all road users in terms of crashes with passenger vehicles. Severe injury, 10% risk is somewhere around the 20 km/h impact, and almost certain death at these higher, the 50 km+. And young and old even more vulnerable. And so we're really looking at trying to get those speeds down around the 20 km/h at these conflict points and the like, or otherwise trying to separate. In terms of sort of these different treatments, we've seen a number already there. Yes, so the Copenhagen style separation is very favourable and altering the likelihood most in your safe system assessment. And then the roundabouts and challenges we've had with cyclists at roundabouts for many years. These sorts of Dutch style roundabouts, ways of treating cyclists and pedestrians at roundabouts are seen as generally best practice if you can fitted in there. And certainly we've seen a number of these pop out in different jurisdictions around Australia. That's a mock-up of Moray Street in Melbourne, and it's functioning really well. I don't have a picture of it, a real one of it, but the idea being that the cyclists sort of come off the road and would go around the roundabout that way as they wanted to, rather than mixing in with the traffic, and providing this priority for both pedestrians and cyclists at these entry and exit points to the roundabout. So really, we see this would reduce the likelihood and severity for pedestrians and cyclists due to the lower speeds from the roundabout itself, slowing vehicle speeds, and the raised platforms, and the likelihood being the fact that it's priority, it's clear crossing point, it's removed a number of the that sort of squeeze conflicts and those sorts of things. And I think that we can start to take those similar philosophies into the bigger roundabouts. Two-lane roundabouts, extremely problematic for cyclists, obviously, trying to do a right turn from there is a challenging exercise, but the same philosophy could be presented. These are mock-ups of some of these, I suppose, more major roads which still have a cycle facility that needs to cross the road, and some different sketches coming along. So happy to provide those. They're in your notes, but some more detail on that sort of stuff. Do we have a hand raised there, Kathy? Maybe I think I saw something pop up. Maybe no.
No, you did. Couple of points here. So Kevin was just commenting. I'm not sure if you meant the Moray Street one. This large roundabout has high entry and exit speeds designed in. European roundabouts have lower entry and exit speeds due to different geometry. Some further comment from someone else. Some cyclists would find these paths challenging. And a follow-up question, do cyclists ever go the wrong way around the Moray Street roundabout?
There's quite a few good questions there. Okay, so do they ever go the wrong way around it? So we did an evaluation of the Moray Street roundabout. We had the cameras out there for a few weeks and analysed it. We didn't see anybody going the wrong way around it. We did see that a small portion just carried on using the roundabout, went in, the cyclists, as opposed to going, using the facilities, which you'd expect, because not all cyclists are the same, are they? We have the commuter cyclists, we have the what we call the mammal, the middle-aged men in lycra, and we have kids and all sorts. So you've got different different types of cyclists that would use this. So we didn't see any of that. The one from Mark about the radial roundabout or the tangential entry is one that's brought up quite a bit, and there's good debate out there on this one, and I suppose I can just sort of weigh in my my thoughts. I mean, these roundabouts that are often being produced in these areas of these dual lanes are, I suppose, intentionally bringing the speed just down to that sort of 40, 50 kilometers per hour, and it's absolutely just thinking about the conflict between vehicle to vehicle. So not trying to bring it down with a sort of a radial style roundabout where you'd go a straight run into it and then have that more abrupt sort of turn, which the Europeans would use a lot more. So, but I do think if you're starting to, I think the really the great point about that is that this one is providing that high speed function, but is also trying to cater for obviously larger traffic movements of cyclists and pedestrians. So we're having a bit of conflict there in terms of our priorities and what's been going on for use here. So I think that's a it's a pretty valid point to bring up. I think they were the two that I wanted to cover there.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, just a little diagram. We were adapting off the again a Dutch diagram, just sort of talking about cyclist facilities on mid-block sections, and you know the idea of sharing the road with cyclists and vehicles up to maximum about 30 kilometres per hour is sort of generally okay, and you'd even question up about 30 kilometres per hour. Prize for the first person who writes in what this symbol is called. As we keep going. Oh, look at them go. Jeez. Well played, New Zealand. Who's that? James has got it again. I reckon James has got like super high speed internet. It just comes in quick.
There's something going on with James, yeah, but
yeah,
I'm going to give it to Mark.
Or James. Give him a minor prize. I had something I wanted to say about it. Sharrows. Oh yeah, no, yeah. So yeah, Sharrows, the shared arrow, so indicating that shared space. Funny, we asked that to the Queensland Department of Main Roads group. There were 30 of them, and none of them managed to get Sharrow, which is a bit worrying. Anyway, the separated facility up in that 30 to around to 70, but you know, this is still physical separation of some description, and again 70 might be a little high. And then if you're up in these higher speed roads, we're really completely separating off-road facilities. Okay, good. Well, stand up, have a stretch. We're over halfway, and it's nearly knock-off time into the weekend. But we're going to cover two more road users. We had a fair bit of chat about pedestrians there anyway, in that thinking of movement in place and categorisation and livability, and what sort of treatments and features we want to provide, and their vulnerability and the like. But certainly the idea of a raised pedestrian crossing, what we would call a wombat crossing over this side of the ditch, and it is to me the sort of absolute of a pedestrian crossing facility, because the both the likelihood and the severity are influenced. We actually know that an at-grade pedestrian crossing, a zebra crossing as you might call it, is not particularly effective in terms of road safety, and a lot of scenarios can increase your risk. And especially on slip lanes is an area that got a whole lot of interest, and we you know, put out a few little statements on that online, and it got lots and lots of differing opinions, and we got some hate mail from people, which is you're having a good time of it if you're getting you know, angry letters written to you about that. But you know, the thing that nobody can argue with is that raised element reduces the speed and the severity of any incident that will occur. And the debates that really come into it are the alteration in the likelihood when you add a zebra crossing on a slip lane, or you don't, or you have other facilities. And that's, you know, there's continuing debate. There was a New Zealand paper from Royce, I think it was, who did some analysis on that. Then we've had the Andrew O'Brien stuff over here, O'Brien traffic stuff come out, and there's lots and lots of debate. But yeah, nobody's arguing against the fact that a raised will be better aligned with safe system principles. I suppose the fact that an intersection has a slip lane indicates it's got some traffic priority function to it, which can be a challenge, and heavy vehicles and the like. But I think that's a hot topic of interest in New Zealand, as I understand. A bit of thinking about these sort of sort of features. The also with the slip lanes, while I'm on it, is the fact that as you approach a slip lane, if you're driving, you look to the right, don't you, to see if you can put the foot down and go, and you've got your gap. So immediately we've had a likelihood alteration by the fact that the driver is no longer looking at the conflict point, which is not a great position to be in. So anyway, but a safe system assessment's, very much one of your facilities to logically look through, or one of your tools to logically look through the risk of these sorts of intersections. But my rule of thumb is that if you have enough pedestrian activity to warrant pedestrian priority, you've got enough pedestrian activity to raise the thing as well.
Good point, Ken. Quick question. Why is only part of the Wombat crossing equipped with tactiles?
In this diagram,
Yeah.
picture, part of it, oh, half of it, yeah, that doesn't, prize for whoever spotted that. And there's a pole right in the middle of this one, so there's some, maybe that's it, maybe they're trying to say you should only go that way, but prize for whoever did that. That's a real road safety audit, a keen eye look at stuff. I like it. This is in New Zealand. I can't remember where though. Somebody know it?
Another prize for whoever guesses it?
Yeah, type it in if you know it.
We don't know the answer, so
We'll take anything.
Going to Jody. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we've seen lots of. I got it.
The cycles.
I didn't take the photo, so Bruce Corbin gave it to me. So I'm not sure exactly where it
Ran out of money. Okay,
just give them all a prize, Kathy.
I'm going to turn into Oprah. Everyone gets some socks.
Okay. Here's one. The other advantages you get are this is probably not there's a little bit of likelihood factorization into this where the pedestrian is at a higher height in a better site, but it's also that idea that you don't need to get pedestrians to drop down and then come back up again. This little story that I'm going to say to you, to me, just clarifies that we know what safe system is, and we've known that for a long time. We just don't afford that to the general public. So this is in Adelaide, and it's an island there. There's a slip lane on the other side of that, an island there, and they had a couple of workers doing some work in that island down with the electrics and all that sort of stuff, and they were in there for about a week. And so for these two workers, what was put up is these barriers, a work site speed limit reduction, and in South Australia, interestingly, that's a 25 km/h speed limit for a work zone. So 25 km/h back in the day when this was taken. And so they did their work for the week, and then they finished, packed up, and the barriers were removed. The speed limit went back up to, it was 60 km/h back when this was taken, 60 km/h. And then we saw about 3,000 or 4,000 pedestrians per day standing in that island. So what that really hammers home is that we know what safe system is, because we were affording it, or what high alignment with safe system principles is. We were affording it to those workers, but the general public, well, no. I mean, they're standing there. They're the same stature, aren't they? They have the same biomechanical tolerances. The likelihood, well, maybe you could argue there's a little less likelihood for the general public, because they might be looking for vehicles as well while they're standing there, and the workers are concentrating on their electrical wires or whatever it is. But we're splitting hairs there, aren't we? So if I ever have to do an elevator pitch on the safe system, the elevator pitch where you've got whatever it is, 20 seconds to explain this thing, I just simply say, do you know anything about workplace health and safety, OH&S style stuff? And they say, oh, yeah. I say, well, afford that, give that to the general public in their travel around the road network. And that, think about them in the same way. And how would we operate a road network under those circumstances? And it's sort of, okay, that's pretty much it. We're pretty close if we start to, thinking about it that way. For pedestrians, yeah, again, the advantages of slowing through conflict points is obvious, and it can be done at signalized intersections. And this is the likelihood and the severity when we're looking at safe system assessments. It's not changing the exposure, even the signalization, and we're telling them to stop at different times. That's not influencing the exposure under a safe system assessment framework, because we know that some will just walk anyway. I love a good dwell on red as well, and I don't know if that's been utilised in New Zealand at all, but the basic premise of a dwell on red or a rest on red is that during times of increased pedestrian risk, basically being Friday night, Saturday night, or Thursday night if you're in around these drinking establishments, partying areas. The signal's default is to sit on red on all all directions, and only when a vehicle comes up, hits the loop, does it drop to green and then drop straight back to red. And so what that does is just very much makes it not a thoroughfare for these vehicles going through. And slows every vehicle as long as they're going to, abide by the red signal. So that's it is a likelihood reducer, but it's a pretty good likelihood reducer. And I think, to me, it really aligns well with safe system principles, because it's acknowledging that we're going to have intoxicated pedestrians falling out onto the road, doing stupid things in there, because that's what intoxicated people do. The absolute sort of classic response to that is, well, they shouldn't get drunk and they shouldn't get out, they shouldn't walk on the road like that. And you should be fixing those people, stopping them doing that. And you go, well, yes, I mean, that's idealistic world, we'd get some of that, but we have to acknowledge that that's happening, and we'll work on that over the long term. But if there's something we can do in the interim. And you can't argue that provides a high movement corridor at midnight on a Friday night and a Saturday night. And again, we're seeing different crossing points and for the turn in there, and it's pretty good stuff. The regulatory speed limit is such an important aspect of both the likelihood and the severity. And I just love this graph in terms of the year that they changed the 60 default to the 50 default, and the casualty crashes per year for pedestrians. And you can see that down there. All right, now motorcyclists, and I'm just gonna, I've got sort of 5 S's that I look at for motorcycle safety, and I've told some of you this before, but sight, surface, sign, strike, and speed. And there's still good things to think about when we're doing safe system assessments and thinking about motorcyclists. But motorcyclists end up in most safe system assessments popping out as the highest score. And the highest score is the worst alignment with safe system principles. And that's due to their vulnerability and their ability to get up to speed. So biomechanical tolerances, which I'll show you shortly, which are not anywhere near, obviously, the passenger vehicles. They don't have the shell of protection, and the speeds, which are quite high and being struck by high-speed vehicles. So when we think about those, though, the likelihood factors are the sight, the surface, the signs. So can you see the motorcyclist, or the motorcyclist see what's coming up? The surface and the signs, they're all likelihood factors. The strike, being what the motorcyclists will hit and how the motorcyclists will hit it, is influencing our severity. And the speed, as we've talked about with other stuff, that's influencing both the likelihood and the severity. The ways that you would influence the exposure would be blocking off roads or the like, or banning motorcyclists from certain routes. So this one's not in your notes, but I've popped it in there because I think it's fairly groundbreaking research, which has just recently been released. End of last year it was released, and hasn't got as much traction as I think it should have. But this is some injury risk curves for motorcyclists in different crash types, and I think this is the kind of thing we needed more clarity around, because we've always just lumped motorcyclists with pedestrians and cyclists, and there's slightly different characteristics. But we're seeing the Maze 3, the injury severity index of 3+, so sort of high-level serious injury and fatalities. And we see here for passenger vehicle crashes head-on. They're talking about relative speed. The reason they're talking about relative speed in with motorcyclists is that fact that the motorcyclists will be pushed back. Like they don't have the weight to be pushing the vehicle, the passenger vehicle back. But you're seeing some of those more flattened out curves, which is than some of the S curves we've been using in the past, and somewhere around the 50 kilometers for that. There, but we're seeing if these ones are actual impact speed, but road barrier of any type, and we're seeing there we get some of these sort of 10%. It's going up fairly quickly there. Tree post, surface embankment, and the grass are there. What I'll do is get Kathy to just send that this slide through at the end of this session, because I think it'll help, and you might be able to use it as you're dealing with motorcycle challenges. But it's interesting stuff. So, sight. Can the motorcyclist be seen? Motorcyclists obviously smaller, harder to see, and so inevitably in a safe system assessment, their likelihood score is going to be a little bit higher than all the crash types of the passenger vehicles, because they're harder to see. They have an inherent instability, being two wheels. They're more influenced by the surface conditions and those sorts of things. So much easier hidden behind trees, signal controller boxes, power poles, and other vehicles as well. So obviously the likelihood is up. The surface, again, is a likelihood factor in there. We know that the lean of the rider and the contact patches are small on the surface, and we call the motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine for maintenance surface issues. They're the first to have that as a factor influencing their crashes. So, but these are the likelihoods of crashes. So if you go in to do an assessment and you go out there to the existing conditions and you see that there's surface deficiency, be that, you know, it's a polished surface, there's, you know, flushing or potholes or anything like that, those are going to influence the likelihood of motorcycle crashes. Steel plates, any of these slippery surfaces, still the likelihood of that crash. Signs, so again, signs are a likelihood factor in our safe system assessment, and motorcyclists are quite attuned to signs, and certainly there's the motorcycle specific warning sign available, which motorcyclists, there's some good research that was done. Well, I don't know, good research. There was some research done to show that motorcyclists are very attuned to this sign, understand that it's directly for them, and very conscious of whatever supplementary warning you might put under there. And the strike hazard. Well, we saw the biomechanical tolerances, and you saw the barrier one, which was some fairly low speeds there. I mean, these are some. What am I saying? There's a European crash test for motorcycle dummies, and they use a 80 kilogram modified dummy where they just modify a few little bits and pieces to make it more like a motorcyclist. I can't remember what the modifications are. Something to do with thumbs to be able to hold on to the motorbike, and something to do with the neck. But anyway, and then the European test is crashed at 60 kilometers per hour at 25 degree. And so that's into just a Charlie post, a C-beam. You can see the crash that happened there. This is with some underrun protection. So it's still only at 60 kilometers per hour, but we can see the deflection of energy there, which is providing us with really great benefits in terms of rider safety. So this is passing those European crash tests with that underrun protection, the deflection of the system, the redirection of energy is all giving us great reductions in the severity of the crash. So the crash has still happened, and it's just lessening the severity. Funny story about that crash test, which was done at Crash Lab in New South Wales, is that these dummies cost about $250,000 to $300,000 each, and they chucked it down there into their barrier, and they wrote off the dummy. So had to buy a new one to continue their testing of the rub rail. So maybe should have started with the rub rail test. Now, there's lots of different underrun protections available, and check your local approved systems or the ASBAP lists to determine which one you'd use on which barrier system. And those going to barrier training on the 25th, well, you'll be inundated with information, no doubt, about underrun protection for different barrier types. Speed. We talked about speed influencing both the likelihood and the severity of crashes for all road users, but including motorcyclists. And we know that advisory speeds can help there in terms of reducing the likelihood and severity. We know that regulatory speed limit reductions work, and any other ways we can sort of reduce that speed, we're going to get benefits in both those categories for motorcyclists. Okay, so a couple of questions for the group, and we're running along in good time here. Is anything I'll start with anything associated with pedestrian cyclists or motorcyclists you wanted to have a bit more discussion about, or anything you'd like to share with the group in terms of some of the treatments that are happening and how they might be thought about under the Safe System Assessment Framework. So I'll pause there for very open-ended. Any questions?
Thanks, Ken. We had a question earlier when you spoke about dwell on red for pedestrians, and the comment from Kevin is it's a good idea for pedestrian priority streets. Why not have head phase as a resting default?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, essentially that is a sort of dwell on red scenario, which you might have as more than just in those wee hours. I suppose the ones that we've trialed that I've been involved in, the UK does this quite a bit as well. They do the rest on red, they call it. The dwell on red that we trialed was on roads that I suppose had a bit more of that vibrant streets functionality to it. So it was still a major arterial of some description, or a decent movement function to it. So I was trying to sort of cater for this during specific times. And then to a degree, it was a way to, you know, get those sort of things in without it being a major community backlash, political backlash. I mean, the reality is that it's pretty hard to argue some of this, even though, don't get me wrong, the traffic ops people will have had some pretty big arguments about implementation of dwell on red in, you know, country towns, or you know, you can almost call them cities, with a bypass. So it's not like the freight's going through this area, and the commentary around, oh, well, that's going to impact, and they've calculated some small amount that it's going to impact, and that there hasn't been enough pedestrian crashes there to warrant it. Like, yeah, okay, that's an old way of thinking about it. We know the risk's still there, and so again, these safe system assessments and the way they quantify and they produce some graphs and things are a nice little counter to that, you know, to that argument that you know, not enough people have, there hasn't been enough trauma there. But yeah, something I think, if it hasn't been done in your local area, something you might want to investigate as a road safety treatment. The UK, the ones I've seen in the UK have a sort of high street, like the high street, and it's got, you know, pubs and bars and clubs littered along it as they do, and they've got, you know, signalised pedestrian crossings along the way, and they'll just dwell those on red in those hours, and the route becomes very, very slow and very you know, very annoying to drive down. So so people alter their travel patterns, don't use it as much, and any that do still use it come up and slow down, and then, you know, slow down again and slow down again. Any other questions or comments there around pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists?
Not at the minute, Ken.
Okay, that's all good. So I'll just explain briefly where we're going to go from here. And everything we've been doing so far is to set up this really nice platform for us to do the assessment. Now, it was important to spend the time that we did with the principles, with the categorization, and with some of the treatments and things that are effective and a little less effective. And the reason for that is that next module, I want to be straight into the mechanics of how to do the assessment, where to, you know, what to write where, how to score things, how to present the assessment. And the assessment framework is documented in this document. And as I said, that was released in 2016. And it took a couple of years to actually, you know, get traction and a lot of people using it. We're seeing a big swell of safe system assessment happening now. And in the sort of the hundreds of safe system assessments that have now been done on major infrastructure projects around Australia and New Zealand, there's been some learnings. Australia hasn't updated and done a version 2. And so the jurisdictions are starting to put out a few of their own clarifications around it. When you get in there and you'll have a play around with a safe system assessment, you'll discover some things that you might go, oh, I reckon this could be improved one way or another. And it is a fairly new process. So those things we should be feeding back to Austroads. We should be putting in local guidance to try to improve the whole thing. But the assessment framework is very versatile, and it was always intended to be very versatile in its production. It can be done on a remote community. It could be done on a design of a new intersection upgrade. It could be done on a whole infrastructure program if you wanted to do that. And so the scale and the depth of the assessment are something that you can alter around. you really get into understanding this project context. And we talked about that with the movement and place categorization, the road function, what's the purpose of the project, what are the vehicles, what are the speeds, what's the composition of vehicles. We do the matrix, which I've been alluding to, and some of you have played around with. And if you're a bit confused still about that, don't worry. Next module is all about walking you through filling out a matrix and presenting that information. And then the thing I'm pretty much going to finish on today is just highlighting that the treatment hierarchy, just crossed it out there trying to circle it, treatment hierarchy is something that we do in a safe system assessment, is to say that some treatments align a lot better with safe system principles than others. And what we do is categorize them into primary or supporting. Not to be confused with primary being your #1 recommendation and the S being secondary recommendation. No, you could have multiple primary recommendations, or you may have no primary recommendations and have only supporting recommendations. But primary recommendations are features that virtually eliminate death and serious injury, utilizing the infrastructure in place for the crash type that you're focused on. And we at a broad brush level, categorize rural roundabouts, one-lane roundabouts into the primary category. We categorize continuous barrier systems into that primary categorization. We categorize raised safety platforms that bring speeds down to those tolerable levels for primary. Again, probably for the intersection crashes between passenger vehicles, if it's designed around the 50 or 40, and it'd have to be lower than that to get the primary categorization for the more vulnerable road users, being pedestrians and cyclists and even motorcyclists in that sense. The supporting ones are things that we know improve road safety, but they don't get us to that high-end almost elimination of death and serious injury. So things like delineation, line marking, surface improvements, warning signs, even traffic signals in a lot of circumstances are considered that supporting treatment. Now, I've brought that up sort of early because it's something that a lot of safe system assessors, as they're starting out, sort of struggle to categorize things. And we see a lot of people putting supporting treatments as a primary because they will say, oh, but that's what I recommend. That's my primary recommendation. No, it's not about primary and secondary. It's about a primary treatment being the very high end virtually eliminates, and supporting treatments are ones that improve road safety but don't get us that big way. Most primary treatments, in fact, in most scenarios, your primary treatment has to address the severity of crashes. The only reason it wouldn't have to affect the severity of crashes is if you already had travel speeds down below the sort of tolerable thresholds, which would be a very weird scenario for you to be putting in a primary treatment under that scenario. But so really, you've got to be addressing the severity of crashes to get that primary. But we'll play a little bit more around with that. And as I always say, best way to learn anything is to get out there and do a safe system assessment and to ask questions as you're doing it or get some feedback on what you've presented and adjust accordingly. We're going to make your life as easy as possible to do your assessment at the end of next module, which will be to provide you with a template safe system assessment, so you don't have to be writing a whole lot of stuff in there. You're just simply into the assessment and the conjuring up of recommendations and categorization of recommendations. The sites we're just preparing and finalizing. I think, Kathy, am I right that everybody will have a site somewhat close to their home or their workplace?
Correct. They'll have a site close to their workplace. So what we've done is assign one per office location, and so you'll be able to work on it with a friend if you have a colleague in the group that that is also from your office location, and if you don't, then you can work on it both. But yes, that I'm in the process of uploading those to Schoology, and they'll be there for Monday's session.
And we'll monitor the Auckland situation and adapt if there's some more stringent requirements around movement in the community and the like. So we do like people to get out on site, and it really is part of a safe system assessment, a bit like a road safety audit, where you gain a lot of understanding of the functioning of the area and the road users and the things that are increasing risk by actually getting out and physically being there rather than looking at it from another perspective. Okay, currently no change in alert level in Auckland. That is good to hear. So any other questions? I might let you out a little bit early. Then we sort of intentionally left a little bit of time here to have any discussions about any of the things covered in the first 3 modules, because next module, as I said, is really all about how you mechanics of a safe system assessment, not so much the principles of what works well in road safety, what aligns well, what is likelihood, what is exposure, what is severity, and the like. Okay, it's sounding like it's sounding like that you most all seem to want to get into your weekend a little bit early and not have too much of that discussion. Anyway, I encourage you to shoot through an email if you want, get in contact if you do have any questions that arise, share some information with others if they if you've got any good intel on any of the stuff we've presented. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you next module. If you log in a little bit early, a chance to win a prize, of course.
Module 3 quiz is now live, so you don't get off that easy. Jump in there and do your Module 3 quiz, and if you haven't done Module 2 quiz, finish that one off as well.
Ranjan's already wanting to get it stuck into a beer for the weekend, so you can have that after you finish your quiz.
That's right. Good stuff.
Thank you very much, and yeah, I think we've got a really good platform to go in and get some safe system assessments. Your assignments, I should mention, they get marked, and you can see the marking and the commentary in Schoology. So maybe, Kathy, again, do we email that, or do you want to show that?
I'll send a little snip of how that looks, and I've also loaded all of those fact sheets that Ken spoke about earlier. So they've been loaded into Schoology, as well as that additional motorcyclist slide as well. So instead of spamming your inbox with stuff, I've popped it all in there. So that's all available to you now. Yes, and I'll also show you how you can see the comments. So for those people that have emailed, that's fine. Keep emailing through if you have any troubles. I'm getting those to Ken. You'll finish marking the Module 2 ones over the weekend. Thanks, Ken. So that everyone's got some feedback before they launch into their safe system assessment task next week.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to next module where we'll prime you up to get you out safe system assessing. Thank you.
Bye.